What we actually have now with this Bitcoin bill is that they're attempting to fast track that. I expect rapid adoption, but I also said that after El Salvador in 2021 or two, and I was kind of wrong about that too. It's different now that we're talking about America doing it. 35 reserve bills that have been introduced across 23 states and federally, add in all the other legislation beyond the reserve bills. I wanted a way to track this and to kind of map it and to keep tabs on it and also to report on it and kind of get the accurate information out there about what's happening, and started a website, bitcoinlaws.io. The fact that Larry Fink becoming one of the biggest Bitcoin promoters in the world, like, what more do you need to say? Now, many of these giant players like Morgan Stanley, they actually haven't even yet, to this day, started to proactively sell the spot Bitcoin ETFs. They've been precluded from doing that. When big, powerful, wealthy people are not paying attention to you at all, that means you are irrelevant. When powerful, wealthy people are paying a lot of attention to you, that means you are relevant. I think it's a sign of Bitcoin's victory.
I saw something, I don't know if this was actually the last time we were in there, but you have golden age enjoyer in your Twitter bio, and I actually just saw it last minute when I looked at your profile. What is that golden age that you were talking about?
It's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek reference to the idea that I'm not sure who coined it. I think it was picked up by the Trump administration talking about Bitcoin and this kind of new era of Bitcoin and digital assets and other things. But this idea that we'd be entering a golden age now. I kind of, obviously, in a certain sense, I do believe that. But so it's a bit of a meme that this is the kind of the dawn of a golden age.
You're enjoying the Trump golden age that is coming now.
Well, I mean, look, we can talk about that. It's the first few weeks have been a little bit less golden than probably a lot of the market and myself predicted, but obviously broadly optimistic, of course.
Interesting. Yeah, actually, I usually start with returning guests of what's your kind of your highlight in since we last recorded. I think last recording is at least a year now away. So it was, I think, around the ETF launch time when we last recorded, and now it's kind of the strategic Bitcoin reserve launch time now. What kind of is your highlight? What stands out for you in the last year?
So I think still I would say the biggest highlight of the past year, thinking about, I guess, the entire 12 months would be the ETF launches. I had a strong sense beforehand that they would be important and they would be meaningful and they would be a big story in Bitcoin. So I was a bull, a big ETF bull before they launched, and even I was wrong about just how impactful they have been, about how successful those launches were. I think it's like tens of billion, maybe $40 billion of like net inflows to the Bitcoin ETFs, the most successful ETF launches ever of any ETFs by a long way in the first 12 months. So just that, they were successful in and of themselves, but of course it's like bigger than that. What do they represent? It's the beginning of this age of, I would call it capitulation to Bitcoin. That's what institutional adoption is, right? Some people have different views on that, but I think it's like, it was such a big milestone, in my view, along the path to Bitcoin's complete and total victory. The fact that, Larry Fink becoming one of the biggest Bitcoin promoters in the world, like, what more do you need to say? And so that I think would be like highlight number one of the past year. Obviously, the presidential election results were massive. However which way it plays out, TBC, I think are quite clearly in a very positive direction for Bitcoin. Yeah, that's a bit more prospective, but I think that would be a highlight too. And yeah, I think so big year for institutional adoption, for political adoption. And I think the kind of final like withering away of the last vestiges of kind of Bitcoin FUD, really any serious legitimate FUD in any direction.
It's a normalization and acceptance of Bitcoin, while now nation states and corporations talking about it. It's a really good one. Because I saw also you covering a lot of ETFs last year. What do you expect kind of from the second year? I heard a lot of like ETFs need some time to really get going. There's some processes. It's not like if family businesses and bigger businesses and institutions and high net worth individuals buy that ETF, there's usually like a process. It's like quarter to quarter. They also like to see like bigger time frames when the product was already launched, so they don't want to be in the first 6 months. They want to be like when it's already a little bit older. How big do you foresee the second and the third and the fifth year be for Bitcoin ETFs?
So it's hard to put a number on it, but I would say very big. And I think, even though, as I just said, the ETFs were such an enormous success in year one, these things do take time to percolate. New products like this do take time to percolate through the system, as you mentioned, in tangible ways that we already know about, right? Like there are massive, what are called wirehouse institutions, like kind of Morgan Stanleys of the world, who have enormous networks of, financial advisors, in essence, who it is their job to basically pick up the phone and talk to all of the kind of clients and customers in the enormous Morgan Stanley network, right? And so this is the kind of distribution network for these ETFs. Now, many of these giant players like Morgan Stanley, they actually haven't even yet to this day started to proactively sell the spot Bitcoin ETFs. They've been precluded from doing that, right? So obviously there's kind of a case-by-case variation here, but really what we've seen is they're allowed to sell them if they get inbound interest. But in terms of packaging the spot Bitcoin ETFs up into kind of outbound proactive sales pitches, and then a variety of other ways that they can be packaged up into kind of other index products and everything else, like all of these things do take time, but many of these steps haven't occurred yet, right? So there is still an enormous on-ramp that is being kind of progressed through just to get the ETF distribution network up and running. And so I guess that's on the side of the distribution. And then you look at the side of the demand too. There are several really interesting stories of different institutions over the past year and then even the past couple of months who have kind of emerged as big ETF buyers. So just two, by way of reference, would be the kind of pension funds in the United States. So I think we've got Wisconsin and Michigan are two states that have allocated to Bitcoin ETFs so far. So that's just two states, right, out of 50, and then in fairly modest allocations themselves. So the pension, just the public pension fund market itself is worth about $6 trillion in the United States. So that's really just the tip, not even the tip of the iceberg there, just for one class of investor. And then, of course, you have, I think it was the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund in kind of the Q4 filings that emerged too. So on the demand side, you can see that there are all these classes of investors that have only just started to break in as well. So when I think you imagine, you kind of forecast out from that, this kind of apples to apples comparison of like, all right, well, who else looks like those investors and are not yet on the network? And then on the supply side, on the distribution side, well, getting all that infrastructure built, which still hasn't happened, then I think year 2, year 3, year 4, it's going to be big. Will it be continuous record-breaking quarters every time? I don't know, but I think it's going to be, the right analogy, I think, is to what happened with gold after the gold ETFs launched, right? This wasn't just a kind of like a one-time repricing. It was like an 8-year unbroken bull market or something from, 2004 to 2012, I think, unbroken bull market for gold. And I think something like that you would expect to happen, not to say that like BTC itself, that Bitcoin's going to be kind of up only forever. But certainly with regards to like ETF adoption, I think it's just, there's so much pent up demand that I think, it's going to take a long time for it to all get online.
And it's kind of amazing when you think about the hurdles that the Bitcoin ETF launch had. I just think about Vanguard not kind of wanting that product at all, and it was still the most successful ETF launch.
Exactly.
So it's kind of amazing, with so much FUD, with so much opposition against Bitcoin, it was still the most successful one. That is kind of for me of like, okay, maybe year 2, 3, 4 is actually the real, like, huge amount of wealth comes actually through the ETFs into Bitcoin, which is, it's kind of exciting, honestly, like the adoption wave, and those things take time. It's a product in year 1. It was already a really successful one. I do agree with you here a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. You also building now something new is the Bitcoin laws. What is that?
Yeah, so Bitcoin laws started as, well, it still is. It's a kind of a side project that I started a couple of months ago, maybe not even 6 weeks ago, as an attempt to try and track all of the legislation that started to get introduced across the United States, really, as the kind of congressional sessions began in 2025. So there was this. It's slowed down a little bit with the kind of volume of new legislation being introduced, although there are still more bills being introduced. But what we saw in the first couple of months of the year was states all over the country introducing a variety of bills, regulating ostensibly Bitcoin and other digital assets. Many of them state-level strategic Bitcoin reserve bills or attempts at reserve bills, or depending on your definition, but something approaching a reserve bill. And so I started seeing some news of this. Found it challenging to kind of get a hold of all the details of all of these bills myself and just keep track of them, right? Because I think now, I'm updating it daily, but I think now there are, maybe 35 reserve bills that have been introduced across 23 states and federally. And then if you add in all the other legislation beyond the reserve bills, all of which I haven't yet fully captured, but we're in the range of 80 to 100 different pieces of legislation that are currently in flight. So I wanted a way to track this and to kind of map it and to keep tabs on it, and also to report on it and kind of get accurate information out there about what's happening. And so started a website, bitcoinlaws.io, to do that.
You are also a lawyer, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I was a lawyer. I started my career in the legal profession, and that was part of it too, where I was seeing some headlines and reporting around alleged strategic Bitcoin reserves, but of course the devil is always in the detail. And so as I learned myself through many hours of looking through legislation of different varieties, and so I wanted to dig in a little bit more and dug into the details, and then my kind of lawyer brain compelled me to try and report a little bit more precisely on what was going on.
Yeah, I think I will pull that side up. I think it's a really interesting one. So that's basically the USA, and we can see here now like Texas bills, the New Mexico bills, the Arizona Bitcoin bills, and what state. It's kind of fascinating how many there actually are. Like what is total measures, like 80?
Yeah, so that's the total measure is kind of a kind of catch-all term for the different pieces of legislation, right? So what I've tracked so far, although there are some others to add, are 80 different pieces of legislation that are most of them are in flight. A couple have already either failed or have been enacted, but 80 pieces of legislation. And I guess to give a little bit more detail there, so I think people are familiar with the strategic Bitcoin reserve and what that does, but there are lots of other different ways that state legislatures are looking at regulating Bitcoin right now, or just, it's relevant to consider, right? So there are, how is it treated from a taxation perspective? Different kind of commercial codes, relating to kind of money usage and other things. How are miners treated? How are mining facilities regulated? What protections are there for self-custody rights? So there are a lot of, I think some Bitcoiners don't like to talk about this, but as it's just inevitable in my view, and we're seeing this play out as Bitcoin becomes enmeshed with this state, with organizing, of humans amongst each other in the form of governments, all of these issues remain to be worked out. And so there are, numerous different ways that regulations will inevitably have to confront Bitcoin. So that's what the total measures part is, like starting to capture that holistically. And then the rest of it is, obviously people are most excited about the Bitcoin reserves too. So, having taken in a bit of feedback over the past few weeks, I've kind of added in some filters to just drill down on the reserves more specifically too.
Well, and what is a difference? Is live SBR something they already passed, or?
No, although that's a good question. Yeah, I might need to think about the best way to phrase that. But SBRs introduced is just any SBR that has been introduced. Now, of course, some of them have already failed. They at a certain point along the legislative process, they either didn't make it out of what's called a kind of committee stage, or they made it to a vote and were voted down. And so there have been 35 of those that have kind of been initiated, and then I think, based on these numbers, there would have been six that haven't made it, and so therefore 29 are still alive. Still some prospects of success there.
Interesting. Oh, and you also put like a state reserve race. So like which one will be fastest to there? Interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you kind of scroll down to the bottom there, you can see some of those that have failed. There are 5 there. The 6th one, I mentioned a 6th SBR bill that quote unquote failed. That was Cynthia Lummis's original Bitcoin Act bill from last year. So when she introduced at the federal level, so the chart, the kind of diagram you're looking at now is just looking at the states. So that's why the 2024 Bitcoin Act isn't on there. But when you take into account these states here plus last year's Bitcoin Act, that's your kind of six that haven't made it through. But everything else, as you can see, is still alive, with a bit of a distribution of progress. So Arizona currently has two bills in the Senate that are progressing through. They are kind of the furthest advanced. Texas is at a similar stage, but seems to have a lot of momentum, and I think probably the most optimism about Texas passing. And then, you can see New Hampshire, Oklahoma, Florida kind of trailing behind.
What is the bill that makes you most bullish? Like what is the biggest one in here that you kind of see having a huge impact on Bitcoin?
That is a good question. So I'll say this. There's kind of a hidden element to some of these bills. So on the one hand, I think I love the idea of strategic Bitcoin reserves, because for all of the reasons. I think it's just smart policy for state treasurers to invest in Bitcoin, as it is for anybody, and it's further legitimization of Bitcoin, further adoption and normalization, as you phrased it earlier. But of course, one thing people may not understand about the states is they don't actually have that much money, all things considered. We talk about moving the needle of Bitcoin, price, overall contribution to market cap. Some do. Texas is a really big state. So is Florida. But there's a big range, and even then, the amount of money that's kind of proposed in these reserves, it tends to range between 5 and 10% of certain publicly available funds. I haven't gone yet through everything and run the numbers to actually kind of translate through what would be the actual investable impact, although that is on my roadmap. But I'll say this, generally speaking, it's not one state is not like a needle mover for, because Bitcoin is a mature asset class. Having said that, something that people haven't really fully grokked yet is that probably more importantly than the state treasurers investing is the potential pool of capital at the state level that sits with, and I mentioned this before, the pension funds. So every state has pension funds for, public employees of various kinds. And what tends to be the case is there's actually a lot more capital, like tens of billions of dollars, sitting in these pension funds at the state level, much more so in many cases than is kind of proposed to be investable in these Bitcoin reserves. So to answer your question of like which bills may be more bullish, some of them also include explicit authorization for the pension funds to invest. Some of them don't. Some states have completely separate bills for like pension fund authorization, and some states don't even require, legislative authorization at all. Wisconsin and Michigan being two examples. But I guess this is a roundabout way of saying what is the most bullish change that can happen at the state level for Bitcoin investment. In my view, it would be at the level of retirement funds and pension funds investing.
Interesting. That website is really nice. You have a nice overview, and I wasn't aware that there's so much going on. Honestly, like I didn't look at the website before starting this podcast, and with this website, I thought there's like 2-3 states. There's some bills going on. There are way more than I honestly.
There's a ton. Yeah, there's really a ton, and I think. Well, I'm fascinated by it because I'm watching it every day and reporting on it. But I think Bitcoiners would be too if they were aware that all this stuff was going on every day. I'm doing my best to kind of get that information out there. But I'll give you an example from yesterday, and I didn't end up. I was doing other things, didn't have time to report on it. But there is a Bitcoin reserve bill currently live in Maryland, in the state of Maryland, and there was a public hearing with the relevant committee who's considering this bill right now in Maryland. And there was public testimony on this, for and against. And I think on the for side, there was Satoshi Action Fund. It wasn't Dennis Porter, but that's Dennis Porter's kind of advocacy group who's doing a lot of work here. His name might be Jason, but I'm not sure. But there's a representative from Satoshi Action Fund speaking in favor of the bill. But then there was somebody speaking against. They'd found a local accountant or someone who was like a huge no-coiner and just talking, testifying in public about how Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme and all this kind of silly stuff. And so I think, was there a lot of like new interesting information in that? Maybe not. But I think Bitcoiners should be aware that these debates are happening all around the country, in the United States, and probably other places too, every day. And it is kind of materially affecting how this legislation is being interpreted and perceived by politicians and legislators. So, yeah, there is a lot of action on a daily basis.
That's amazing. That's actually surprises me almost. It also makes me a little bit sad of seeing that I don't see the same action in Europe. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it.
I was just saying if you have the plans of maybe expanding that worldwide of like, okay, let's add all states, but also like do an international type of like, okay, maybe because Czech Republic, I know the central bank said something like that. There will be probably like examples that you can add in here and see like, okay, what's the progress there?
Yeah, there are many examples. And the short answer is that I would love to expand internationally. It's just a kind of a question of time. And, but I'm certainly at some point, I'm certain that at some point I will. It's just a question of when and how. The great thing about the US is that there are really good data sources. So, the great like kind of public APIs and other data sources where I can like get a lot of this information in a systematic fashion. Whereas when you branch out then to saying, all right, let's cover the globe, it becomes more of a kind of hunting game case by case basis, and then what I suspect would be kind of a lot more manual tracking. But for sure, this is it's a global phenomenon. Certainly at the legislative level, as you said, it would be nice if there were more explicitly positive developments happening in the EU and other places. I don't see those, but also I haven't maybe looked hard enough yet. So we'll see.
It's kind of fascinating when we think about, 2021, Salvador, I think, was the first officially strategic Bitcoin reserve country. Then we had Bhutan, which the country, I think, started already in 2019, so before El Salvador, but they only announced it in last year, somewhere not even 6 or 7 months ago or something like that. And now we have the USA, which is totally crazy that the USA is now following. What do you expect for country level strategic Bitcoin reserve in the coming years, when you see that it took 15 years for the first one, then 3 more years for the second one, then half a year for the third one? It seems like exponential growth.
Yeah, I expect rapid adoption. But I also said that after El Salvador in 2021 or two, and I was kind of wrong about that too. Obviously, it's different now that we're talking about America doing it. I think what I understand to be happening right now is that all these conversations are happening behind closed doors. And they take time. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if there were, several other nation states with processes already underway, some announcements coming, over the next 12 months, and regardless of what the US was doing, right? But I think now that we have this reserve officially created in the US, and with the potential too of not just with the executive order, but actually getting the congressional bills through, most importantly, from both Cynthia Lummis in the Senate, and then there's now a House bill equivalent. I think if those pass, well, I guess there are a couple of parts to this question. Is one, what does America look like? And then two, what does the rest of the world do in response? What I'll say is this: the executive order SBR signed by Trump is great, and I think the way that it was drafted is great, considering the different ways that it could have gone. I think it was a well-drafted executive order, but the power of the president himself or herself to not only create a reserve but then initiate a buying program at scale is fairly limited. And not only is the power fairly limited, but it's also somewhat vulnerable. The thing about executive orders is they can be enacted with the stroke of a pen, and they can also be undone with the stroke of a pen, right? So you can imagine a world in which a Democrat politician who is anti-Bitcoin gets elected in 2028, and then day one executive order, we're scrapping this SBR. That's completely feasible. That could totally happen. On the other hand, what's a lot harder to undo are bills that have been enacted through Congress. And so to me, I'm kind of much more excited in a way to see what happens with the House and Senate bills if they get passed. Not only would that further codify the existence of the strategic Bitcoin reserve, but it also has a much better shot at basically appropriating the funds required to embark on the stated plan of acquiring 1 million BTC, right? Acquiring 1 million BTC is not something that Trump is going to be able to do himself. So it's going to require the passage of these bills to do that. Will they get through? I'm not sure. But if they do, it would be great for the reasons I said. Much harder to undo. There's a lot more political legitimacy. And then I think it's just kind of done. Now, if that happens, then to some degree, I think the Trump SBR already should be like a game on moment for the rest of the world. It should be. But I'm saying this as a Bitcoiner. My view is if you're a country not considering this now, you're out of your mind. But I would say if the Bitcoin Act gets passed, then it's more than the cherry on top. It's like all systems go, like rockets are firing. 1 million BTC is like getting sucked up or more, into America's coffers for the long term. And so then that's the kind of thing where I would say, like, my base case would be massive worldwide race to acquire Bitcoin at the nation state level.
Let's take a break for a moment and appreciate the beauty that Coin Vigilante has made with the Bitcoin watches. Those watches are the most amazing, the most elegant way of showing that you are a true Bitcoiner. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece. Make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. And now, if you have Bitcoin, I really do hope that you don't have it on exchange. But if you do have it on exchange, I have two ways for you to deal with that. The first way is you put it on a hardware wallet. That's the entry for you to get into the self-custody game. I recommend BitBox, Bitcoin only edition, for that. It's a super simple and secure way. And if you check out the link in the description, you even get 5% off if you use the code Robin. And the second way is the Bitcoin Way. The Bitcoin Way is your all-in partner in terms of how to get the most out of your sovereignty. They will personalize for you a self-custody setup that is perfect for your individual situation. They will show you how you can secure your own devices. Securing your Bitcoin is not enough. You also have to keep all your devices secure. One topic that is overlooked often is the inheritance plan. What happens with your Bitcoin once you are no longer here? Do you have a plan for that in place already? And last but not least, if you're in jurisdictions where you don't feel safe, it's better to get a plan B. For all that, head over to thebitcoinway.com/Robin to get a 30-minute free call. And just a quick side note, I will be for the first time ever speaking at the Bitcoin Prague event in June. It will be absolutely legendary and I'm really looking forward to seeing all of you there. You can get your ticket in the link down in the description of Bitcoin Prague, and very important, use code Robin to get 10% off your ticket. I'm really looking forward to seeing you there. Is that bill because the Republicans, and I don't know the election system in America that good and the law system, but from what I understand, they have the House and the Senate and the president. So if he wants to pass it and it seems like he goes more and more in that direction, it should be able to actually pass in the time where he is president. So then if it passes, they kind of acquire a million Bitcoin, from what I understand.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess I'll give happy to give a little more context there. So I will say that the text of these bills hasn't been released yet, but from what I understand, I think Senator Loomis said yesterday that they're substantively the same as her bill from last year. And what was proposed in that bill was a 5-year plan to acquire 1 million BTC, 200,000 a year, with a kind of minimum hodl time of 20 years. So no selling, for at least 20 years. And then some other things that, protection of custody rights. There are other things just beyond, like, let's go buy some Bitcoin. It's kind of a holistic Bitcoin Act, right? But those are the headline numbers: 1 million BTC over 5 years. Now, I guess to the kind of process side, and maybe a brief 101 on American civics is that for a bill to get passed into law at the federal level or at the state level, they basically have the same system. There are, you have your two chambers of Congress. You have the House of Representatives, and then you have the Senate. And for any bill to get passed into law, it has to pass through both of those. So like first, let's say Senator Loomis introduces her bill into the Senate. It has to go through several processes, has to kind of be considered by a kind of relevant committee first. So I can't remember what it's called, but it's like the Financial Services Committee in the Senate has to get approved by that. Then it goes to a full vote of the Senate, has to kind of make it through the Senate, get passed. Then it has to do all of that again in the House. So it has to pass through both chambers of Congress. Then after doing all of that, it would go to Donald Trump's desk for signature, and then it becomes law. That's the standard process. What we actually have now with this Bitcoin bill is that they're attempting to fast track that. And so, as I said, the standard process would be one bill introduced in one chamber, it makes it through the first one, and then makes it through the second one. There is a way to kind of short circuit that a little bit where you introduce the same bill concurrently at the same time in both houses. And so it kind of makes it through all the way, in both of them at the same time, gets passed, and then you just kind of reconcile any little differences that there might be at the end, and it basically speeds the process up. That's what's happening now with the Bitcoin Act. So that's why you've seen it been introduced in both the Senate and the House at the same time. So to your question about impact of the election. So the Republicans, these are Republican bills, by the way. So they've been introduced by and sponsored, kind of co-sponsored by Republicans in both the Senate and the House. And the Republicans have majorities in both the Senate and the House, as well as, of course, controlling the White House. So all of that. So superficially, the prospects of success are certainly a lot better than last year, when that wasn't the case. But it's not guaranteed. It's not as if being pro-Bitcoin is like a universally accepted party platform position of every Republican legislator at any level, state or federal. That's not the case at all. So there most likely will be some Republican opposition. And the reason I can say this confidently is because we've already seen that at the state level, right? Probably the best example of that is Utah. Utah were until about a week ago a really good candidate for passing a strategic Bitcoin reserve bill. They had one pass. They had a House bill that ultimately it technically speaking it passed, but in order to pass the bill, what they had to do was strip out all the Bitcoin reserve stuff. So as a Bitcoin reserve bill, it failed. And the reason why it failed was because there was so much opposition to all the Bitcoin reserve stuff. And this is despite Utah having a really strong Republican majority. So, and again, stop me if I'm getting too far into the weeds here, but basically the bill passed the House on a very slim margin. I think it was 38 votes to 34 or something like that. But the Republicans had a much actually stronger majority than that in the House. So what does that tell you? It tells you that there were a bunch of Republicans voting against this bill. And I actually posted about it from the kind of Bitcoin Laws X account, where there are videos of this testimony, right? And so you can see that there are a bunch of Republican legislators who, even though they are nominally on the pro-Bitcoin side, they still have reservations about public investment in Bitcoin, and voice those reservations from a conservative point of view. These are fiscal conservatives who just say, well, it's a bit too risky, or I don't think it's appropriate, or kind of cautious fiscal conservative type thinking. So why am I talking about Utah? Because I think there's a good chance that there would be analogous, similar Republican opposition at the federal level too. I say all of this to say that it's not a done deal that the Loomis bill gets through, and in fact, I think will require a lot of advocacy and a lot of probably loud support from Bitcoiners.
Is it now the time for Bitcoiners to kind of become more politically active for those things?
I would say yes. Like it or not, Bitcoin has become a political constituency in the United States. And this was achieved to, I think, to great success. Like Bitcoiners were instrumental in getting Donald Trump elected last year. Again, like it or not, I think that the facts are the facts. It kind of spearheaded in some part by folks like David Bailey and many others who kind of laid the groundwork of orange pilling Donald Trump himself. But more broadly than that, by drawing together, in reality, donor support. Right, that's how you become a meaningful political constituency, is by becoming two things: becoming a relevant donor class, and then also demonstrating that there are a bunch of voters behind your movement too, who are very passionate and very very committed to the cause. So Bitcoin in 2024, Bitcoiners proved themselves to be just that. A powerful, kind of in alliance with digital assets more broadly, but a powerful donor class, and a very, very loud, very passionate kind of political advocacy group as well. Sorry, my lights died. So should Bitcoiners become more politically active? I think it's a little bit like asking, should hunters become more politically active, or should truck drivers, or should restaurant workers become more politically active? It's like, well, if you don't have any interest in politics as an individual, no, you don't have to, but you are part of a political constituency, and this is the way that democracy works: is that you get listened to when you're a big enough group that can throw its weight around enough, and that's the territory that we're in with Bitcoin. So there will be a political Bitcoin movement for the foreseeable future, and it will be there if you want to contribute to it.
Yeah, and I think the opinion of some Bitcoiners, like, oh, like, I have Bitcoin, I don't need to care about politics. I think it's a little bit short-sighted. It's like maybe Bitcoin doesn't really care about politics because it's a global thing, and the game theory is working out, and we're seeing America now doing it, and like, Europe can be against Bitcoin, but they will come around in 5-10 years when they see all the advantages that America has from it. But you as a person are still in that jurisdiction, and you can really benefit from, let's say, lower capital gains taxes. You're being able to transact with it maybe under $1,000 tax free. You have the right to self custody. All those things can be really benefiting for you.
Yeah, absolutely. You as a Bitcoiner might not care about politics, but politics certainly cares about you, right? Kind of a spin on an old saying. And you're right. There are lots of ways that you can benefit from favorable political decisions as a Bitcoiner, but you can also be negatively affected, right? That's the other side of the coin. My view is, if the prior administration in America was still in power and had won the last election, we would have seen a continuation of what was already happening, which is the arrest of open source developers, the extrajudicial persecution, and for political reasons, more debankings, harsher regulations across the board. So these things matter. And I think, if you'll permit me to get on my soapbox for a second, I think there is a certain strand of discourse in Bitcoin that wants nothing to do with this. And fair enough, like, politics is ugly. It's fair enough to want nothing to do with this. But what I think is not fair is to say that engaging with politics at all as a Bitcoiner is somehow transgressive of the Bitcoin mission or the Bitcoin purpose, or is somehow like antithetical or misaligned with some alleged more pure way of like achieving kind of harmonious, grounds up peer-to-peer vision for Bitcoin in the world. I think it's nonsense, for just the reasons we described. Like, there can be better or worse outcomes from real political decisions made in the near term, and you can either be on the side of the better, or you can be on the side of the worse. That's what democracy is. So I think it's, politics and Bitcoin coming together is inevitable. I think engaging with it is good and healthy, and someone has to do it. So, and ultimately, I think, and again, to go back to where we started the conversation, I think it's a sign of Bitcoin's victory. Like, that's what it's a sign of, right? Like, when big, powerful, wealthy people are not paying attention to you at all, that means you are irrelevant. When powerful, wealthy people are paying a lot of attention to you, that means you are relevant. And they can either be paying attention to you in a positive way or a negative way. What's happening is the most powerful people in the world are paying a lot of very positive attention to Bitcoin right now. So, yeah, tell me where the problem is with that, right? To me, it's not inconsistent with separating money from the state. In fact, it probably is a necessary part of that mission. And I couldn't be more optimistic, really, about where things are going.
How there are two questions in my mind. It's always, when there's so much interesting stuff in it, I cannot decide which direction to go. But I think the first one is like, are you surprised that we are so fast already in the political discussions with Bitcoin, being still so early and still so young in that development?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, I am. I mean, I remember, I've said this a few times, but it wasn't that long ago, 2021, 2022, when it seemed like the world was kind of clamping down on Bitcoin mining, huge kind of environmental attacks against Bitcoin, still serious questions about, is the government going to try and regulate it out of existence? There were no ETFs. There was no discussion of ETFs at that point. Very few serious political candidates taking up the mantle and running with it. So to go from that to this in a couple of years is mind-blowing, for sure. But I think it wouldn't have happened. I really think it wouldn't have happened if not for the very unique circumstances, probably of Trump himself. And this, I think, will be, when the history of this is ultimately written, what I suspect will happen if it comes to light is we'll learn that Trump was really orange-pilled, not just because, there's a bunch of Bitcoiners and they can donate to my campaign, but because he himself and his family this is true, they were debanked. They were debanked for political persecution, through a program of political persecution. So, what could orange pill you faster than learning firsthand that you can be at a whim, even if you are the former president of the United States, just kicked out of the fiat banking system, right? So I'm not saying this is the reason, but what I think is there were a unique set of circumstances that probably really accelerated political adoption of Bitcoin. And, and I guess maybe a more generalized way of saying that is it probably has been a reaction. There was an accelerated persecution of Bitcoin and digital assets. And then as a reaction to that, the pendulum swinging back in the other direction on a number of fronts, Trump himself, but of course, just across the landscape of legislators generally, it really crystallized, I think, in many people's minds, just how fragile financial sovereignty can be. So had it not been for the tidal waves of FUD and persecution, maybe it would have been a slower process, right?
That's very true. I like that idea of pinning that on a person that has gone through that thing of being debanked, and that's I think something that with Trump is a unique story. Also, that he was shot at right before the election. Come out a lot of very interesting, high quality movies out of Bitcoin, 5-10 years down the road, that are just amazing to see. And we have the honor now to actually live through the adoption of Bitcoin in real life and see that movie unfold. And people will just go crazy for that in the future of how amazing those adoption stories were. So I think truly that Bitcoiners that are now active in Bitcoin are actively writing history. Some are smaller part of the book, some of a bigger part of the book, but we all kind of write that Bitcoin story, and we do matter. And I think that's the main message that I think is important. That those voices we are doing something really, really unique here in writing history in the financial revolution.
I couldn't agree more. And it's not only that there's so much great work being done from, I guess, within the ecosystem, but it's also that the space has been completely abdicated by traditional institutions, right? What we should have seen is like in-depth reporting the whole way through from the Wall Street Journal and from mainstream media organizations across the board, but we haven't seen that. Right? There's been like a disinterest and hostility. So, in a way, that's something to be grateful for, because it's kind of cleared the path for honest reporters and honest seekers of truth to shape the narrative the whole way through. And at the same time, okay, we just had this whole story about all this kind of unending FUD. So, I guess how to reconcile that? It's like, on the one hand, there's been this kind of disengagement, disinterest, and hostility, which has, provoked, I think, or helps to crystallize the value proposition of Bitcoin itself, somewhat ironically, and also the kind of lack of real rigorous attention being paid has allowed this ecosystem to flourish. So, all of that is to say, I guess we have to be grateful for the no-coiners, and we have to be grateful for the FUDsters, because, what you don't want to have is intelligent, well-reasoned, well-funded, strong opposition. What you want to have is frivolous, half-interested, poorly researched, unintelligent opposition. And Bitcoin has been fortunate to get a whole big dose of that over the recent years.
Yeah, because everyone that is honest and research Bitcoin deeply and is informed is switching to the Bitcoin side.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's like it's a classic Bitcoin meme, right? It's like you've never met someone who's spent 20 hours researching Bitcoin who's come out the other side of it like hating Bitcoin. Like, such a person does not exist, right? The slight caveat to that, or I guess the mirror image to that, to the negative side, is that there are many people who did come into contact with Bitcoin early, years ago, and who, because they dismissed it out of hand or didn't engage with it properly, they've kind of painted themselves into this corner of like needing to be a lifelong enemy of Bitcoin. This is my perception of, in many cases, it's, well, I have to keep pretending like Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme, because if I ever admit that it's not, then I have to really admit that I was responsible for not getting involved 10 years ago, and that would probably be too much to bear psychologically.
Yeah, there's Peter Schiff always comes to my mind. He's I think the impersonification of that. Peter Schiff is but I think he orange pilled more people than most Bitcoiners. There are probably like 10 Bitcoiners that orange pilled more people than him.
Yeah, I got to say, I'm a big fan of Peter Schiff. Not necessarily his content. I'm not even sure if I follow him, but of course, as a Bitcoiner, you see plenty of it. But he's such a good poster. Like he's I think like 90% of what he does is engagement bait, and he's a master of the craft. There are a bunch of other like really salty no coiners who, like the odd, New York Times journalist who will pop up like once every 2 years to say something negative about Bitcoin. And of course, you look into their tweet history and they were dismissing it at $9. Those people are more the ones I'm talking about. Peter Schiff, in some sense, is kind of archetypal of that type of thinking. I just think he's a master entertainer and an engagement baiter. So I have to at least give him some respect for that.
Absolutely, and there's many more things I wanted to get into with you today, but I have one question that I asked each and every one of my guests of my podcast, and the question is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
So I think that's a good question. What can you learn from me besides Bitcoin? Well, so one tangible thing. I want to give a quick plug to, so this website that I built, Bitcoin Laws, I have built it almost 100% with the help of AI tools. And I have coded this thing. I don't know how to code. I'm not an engineer, but I've coded this thing almost entirely with the help of AI. Anybody that's on Twitter probably sees that this is kind of trendy at the moment. People kind of trying out, building things, vibe coding and whatever. If I had one piece of advice to offer, I would say if anybody's curious in it, go and try it and do it, because it's amazing what you can do. And Bitcoin Laws is an example of something completely written with Claude. Maybe in a more personal sense or a more general sense, I think part of the reason why I think I've been able to add some value, at least let's say with Bitcoin Laws, is just wanting to go one layer deeper than what you see on social media. There is so much noise, and frankly, I hate the term misinformation, but it is misinformation, the way that people are reporting, particularly on a lot of these legislative processes. And so what I would encourage people to do is try and look past the engagement bait and go and read primary sources. I would say this to any Bitcoiner or non-Bitcoiner or anybody. It's increasingly important to go and try and read the primary sources. And I think with Bitcoin Laws, that's something that's part of the mission, is to make it easy and accessible for people to do that, to actually go and go to the actual source of data. I'm incredibly glad that Elon Musk bought Twitter and kind of in some sense fixed it, but in other senses I think he kind of broke it. And I think the critics of it who say that it is just a noise machine right now, I think that there's a strong element of truth there. And I'm not I'm not tilted by it on a daily basis, because I understand that it is what it is, but there is so much noise out there. So go and find primary sources when you can, if it's anything related to Bitcoin in particular. That would be, I guess, a parting piece of advice I would give too.
Absolutely. Yeah. The going to primary sources is extremely valuable. I always look at mainstream media also, just because it's fun to see. And in Austria, they reported on JD Vance being in Munich. And I was like, wow, that has to be such a bad performance he gave. And he said so many bad things about Europe and the UK and Germany. And I was like, okay, let's see the speech. And I was just like, it's a 10-15 minute speech. It's not that long. It's easy to look at. I was just cooking something and putting the speech on at the side, and I was like, that's just reasonable things, like 15 minutes, uncontroversial. Yeah. Hey, it's important that we can say what we want to say. I think the only attack on Europe was an attack on the UK, so not even on Europe, where he said a fact that people are getting in prison because of tweets, and this was a fact.
Which is true.
It actually happened. So, repeating facts should not be an attack, even though it can be one. And I was like, yeah, they have a news story and put their own perception of that on top. I don't want to get into if there's an agenda or not, but they definitely put some subjective thing on there. And it's just way better to, instead of seeing what all the people say about it, just look it up yourself and then see the 15-minute speech. It's so great.
Yep. Couldn't agree more.
Absolutely. One more thing, because you brought up AI, what, if at all, do you think is the impact of AI on Bitcoin?
So one area that I'm not at all an expert on, but very smart people that I know are paying attention to, potential applications for Bitcoin as payment systems between AI agents. And so the idea here being, an increasing share of activity on the internet is going to be conducted by AI agents. they are going to become, increasingly like economic actors who need to go out and do things and buy goods and services. And in order to do that, they're going to have to pay for them. And so there are some really smart people, whether it's at Lightning Labs developing a particular protocol for this, I think L402 maybe, or just others too. There's kind of a burgeoning set of founders and investors who are like looking at this as like Bitcoin basically being and Lightning potentially being kind of payment rails for AI agents. So that's one way. One other way, which maybe is a bit more macro, is I don't know how convicted I am in this view, but I think there's a decent argument to be made that transformative AI may well precipitate massive deflationary effects across the global economy. Goods and services becoming radically, exponentially cheaper. And in an obvious way would be as increasingly jobs become done by robots, right, at much lower cost. And so I think to some degree that has already started to happen, and I think it probably is inevitable. And so then you have to ask yourself, what happens next? And I think any Bitcoiner really has to consider this seriously. What I suspect will happen next is that governments will try to counteract these deflationary effects, which another word for saying massive deflation is like economic contraction, serious recessions. So what's going to happen in response? And it is going to be an attempt to reinflate or keep inflated the economy by printing money, not just to stave off like global recessions, but to keep like core welfare state programs afloat and keep them in place, right? Like how are you going to keep your welfare states alive if tax bases collapse because people lose their jobs because they're being done by robots and all these things? I mean, this gets a little bit like science fiction-y, but I think to some degree these trends are already underway. And what I think it does is basically just accelerate the debasement of fiat currencies.
Interesting. And I think it definitely enhances the adoption of, I think it might be a controversial stance, but if you talk like 50 minutes a day with an AI, you probably get smarter with that. Like you get information and they're really good in giving you information and talking you through stuff. It's kind of amazing. And just like that enhanced also with Bitcoin and getting to decisions also around the financial topic. I think people will get smarter around things and look through things more quickly. And in that way, I think AI is kind of like enhancing Bitcoin adoption. As you said, like also the enhancing the downfall of fiat, basically. Really good. Yeah, I like that framing. As you know, we have an end routine in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And your question from the previous guest is an interesting one. How do you overcome the emotional roller coaster that comes with having and buying Bitcoin? Or do you still have?
I think time. Like, I think I'm fortunate enough to be at a point now where I have overcome that emotional side of things. I've lost count of the number of 20%, 30% drawdowns, and of course the bear market ones too. So for the most part, I think it's just experience and time and repetition. Like anything else, it's almost like a skill that you require expertise in through repetition. Of course, it helps to have a really strong conviction in Bitcoin, and I think if you don't have that, then it's going to be hard to ever develop that resilience. But I think, going through it again and again and again and again, that would be the main prescription. I would say do it again and hodl, and do it again and hodl, and eventually you'll just become more numb to it.
Yeah, and I think as you said, the conviction and the knowing why Bitcoin is kind of the fundamental thing to that.
Sorry, I've got two little orange kittens that are squeaking at me. So
they're so sweet. I love them. Really cool. Then we also know if you are a dog or cat person now.
Yeah, that's the answer. Cat person.
Definitely. Are those the only ones?
No, we've got two other cats actually. A third one orange. So I guess you can see there's a bit of an orange theme in the household.
I love that. Yeah, really cool. Thank you so much, Julian, for being on a second time on my podcast. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you questions, and reach out to you?
Yeah, X is the best place. My handle, I think, Julian _Fahrer. But my DMs are open, I think. So probably the best way to get in touch. Also, I guess I'm running a second account called Bitcoin Laws. So if you have any questions specifically about the Bitcoin laws stuff, you can hit me up there.
Really cool. Thank you so much for being on the show. Also, thank you so much for everyone on this watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.